At exactly 10:17 a.m. on Tuesday, Clara Carter, a modestly dressed black woman in her early 50s, quietly pushed open the boardroom door at Sterling Corp without any warning. Mocking laughter erupted when the white executives realized an outsider had just stepped into their sanctuary of power. "You must be in the wrong room, ma'am," Ryan Sterling sneered, his cold gaze and prestigious surname serving as a shield for all his embezzlement schemes. "Not at all," Clara replied, gently setting a thick file on the gleaming glass table. Laughter died on the spot as they recognized the papers for what they were: irrefutable legal evidence. The invisible woman they'd long dismissed turned out to be the company's single largest shareholder. While they saw only an ordinary woman, Clara Carter had been patiently watching, silently documenting every maneuver of power, waiting for this fateful moment. Her Howard University diploma sat gathering dust in an old drawer, but her ownership documents had never lost their value. And now, with hundreds of employees facing imminent layoffs, Clara Carter had finally arrived, ready to reclaim the company from those who had never truly seen the woman behind the contemptuous glances. The Sterling Corp boardroom was a place where power and ambition whispered through every calculated conversation. Today, white executives in gray suits and gold watches gathered around the table, tossing off mocking laughs in the cold air as they discussed restructuring, cutting hundreds of jobs, trading off cold numbers like cards at the city's highest stakes table. Suddenly, the door creaked open, shattering their familiar rhythm. All eyes snapped to the entrance, where a thin black woman in her 50s stood silently, hair neatly pinned back, wearing only a pale beige blouse, simple slacks, and scuffed black loafers. Her eyes held a serene, unshakable resolve. A collective breath caught in the room. Her presence defied every unwritten rule here. Then, as if on cue, the first derisive laugh rang out from the far end of the table. A young executive with slicked-back hair sneering at her. "Sorry, ma'am, wrong room? Looking for the restroom?" he mocked. Another voice chimed in, flat and patronizing. "This is shareholders only. No outside visitors allowed, miss." Clara Carter didn't respond. She walked slowly between the rows of leather chairs, each deliberate step thickening the air. She ignored the hushed whispers, the scrutinizing stares, and the arrogance etched on every face. When she reached the center of the room, directly in front of the board members, she gently placed the hefty file on the glass tabletop. The soft thud echoed like a knock on destiny's door. No one spoke. Clara's gaze remained unwavering, unfazed, unflustered. In that moment, every laugh died, replaced by attention so taut it vibrated in the silence, fraught with unasked questions, judgments, and doubt. This was the first time power truly felt challenged by someone they'd presumed ordinary, harmless, and invisible. The first bell had rung for a historic overthrow. Silence stretched through the room like a spreading ink blot, clinging to every breath of those who were utterly convinced they held life and death power. In that storm of stares, memories flickered through each board member's mind like ghosts. Had they seen this woman before? A shadow in the hallway, a polite nod in the elevator, a fleeting silhouette at last year's annual meeting. But in a world where power is measured by title and appearance, no one bothered to remember that plain black woman. To them, Clara Carter was just one of hundreds of small, nameless shareholders. No voice, no influence, no real value. For nearly 3 decades, Clara had chosen a life of humility. She never attended glamorous parties, never appeared in the press, never fought for speaking time at high-level meetings. Whenever she visited the company, she slipped into the administrative office, where clerks kept their heads down, and no one dared ask, "What brings you here?" In that system's eyes, she was invisible. The VIP doors remained forever closed to her, a sacred boundary reserved only for the chosen few. Yet, anyone paying attention would have noticed something different about Clara. Her quiet, watchful gaze that absorbed every detail, from idle hallway chatter among senior executives to the quarterly org chart, reshuffles no one outside top management noticed. She never overlooked a receptionist's disappointed expression or a finance team whisper about bizarre bonus payouts. Those seemingly trivial scraps of information, Clara wove into a complete portrait of how power truly moved here. To people like Ryan Sterling, the young CEO dubbed the city's lone wolf, ruthless, ambitious, and cunning, Clara was merely a faint name on a ledger. From the moment he took the reins after his father's death, Ryan believed himself invincible in this world. He'd gone to Harvard, grown up in luxury, and been trained to see the world through the lens of personal and family gain. To him, power was an unforgiving race. Everything existed to bolster his dominion, even if it meant cleaning house of anything weak, expendable, or human. At last year's shareholder meeting, Ryan had glanced at Clara when she timidly signed in. No speeches, no questions, his eyes passing over her as casually as he might an old piece of furniture. Even when someone mentioned Ms. Carter, he'd barely smirk. That small-time shareholder? She might as well not be here. Such was the habit of those who wielded power, without ever glancing at those they deemed on the margins. But beneath her unassuming exterior, Clara never stopped watching. She knew exactly who was hired and who mysteriously resigned. She spotted phantom projects that quietly vanished from the books. She tracked every cut to employee benefits that no one outside the inner circle understood. Though uninvited and unempowered, she had catalogued every crack in Sterling Corp's gilded facade. And now, before her, were the very faces that never bothered to learn her name, those who assumed she would remain an outsider forever. They had no idea their greatest mistake was forgetting her, because the one they rendered invisible held their deepest secret and saw through every scheme cloaked in power. In that charged silence, even before anyone spoke, Clara knew. The real battle had begun. And this time, she was no longer an outsider. In the moment when every pair of eyes remained glued to the file she'd just set down, Clara Carter's memories quietly rose up, flowing back through the years, thick with the dust of time, back to when every secret of Sterling Corp was first planted in seemingly simple encounters. 30 years ago, Clara had just graduated at the top of her class in engineering from Howard University. In that era, her skin color was an invisible wall that slammed shut every grand opportunity. But Clara refused to let her career wither away in silence. At a research conference, she met Thomas Sterling, a man whose eyes shone with uncommon brightness, unlike the typical silver spoon heirs of his generation. Thomas was just starting out, and Sterling Corp was then only a small workshop on the edge of town, chronically underfunded and repeatedly turned away by banks and major investors. To the financial world, Thomas had nothing but ambition, and Clara, no matter how talented, was just that black girl with no pedigree. Yet, in that shared desperation, two people relegated to the margins found a rare spark in one another. That evening, after the final budget report revealed there wasn't enough to cover the staff payroll, Thomas sat lost in thought by the window. Clara, ever the believer in him, silently placed a check on the desk. The entire sum she'd saved over years of part-time jobs, enough to rescue the company from bankruptcy. Thomas stared in astonishment, then gently took her hand. "I didn't just invest my faith in you," he said softly. "I want you as co-founder." Clara offered a small smile. "I have just one condition," she replied. "Keep my name out of the public records. Don't put my face in the media." In those days, naming a black woman as owner would have torpedoed your ability to raise funds. I want to help you succeed, not become a target of society's prejudices. Thomas was silent for a long moment, then nodded, gratitude and solemnity in his eyes. That night, they forged a silent pact. Clara would hold 51% of Sterling Corp's shares, her name hidden in the internal documents, while Thomas would remain the sole public face of the company to investors, the press, and customers. From that moment on, Clara's life became inextricably bound to Sterling Corp, yet always behind the curtain, in the shadows, where no one suspected her true role. For nearly 3 decades, she honored that promise. She appeared briefly at annual shareholder meetings as a minor investor, signing a few papers, never speaking, never posing for photographs, never attending the after-party. All for a simple belief that one day the world would be broad enough to embrace the truth, allowing those forced to live in darkness to step into the light without judgment for their gender or skin color. But when Thomas died unexpectedly, the values they'd built together began to erode. And then came Ryan Sterling, the son raised in privilege, educated at Harvard but detached from reality, who seized the moment to claim the throne. To Ryan, the company was no legacy of collaboration or shared faith. It was a stepping stone for his own power, a stage on which to flaunt his status. Behind his polished veneer, his eyes harbored disdain for anyone beneath his station, especially someone like Clara, forever consigned to the margins. It was the darkness of those years spent, made invisible, that taught Clara to watch, to listen, to remember. She observed every change in management, witnessed Ryan strip away the core values one by one, and saw Sterling Corp transformed into a vehicle for his inner circle's gain. For years, she kept these truths close, as essential as breath, waiting for the moment in history when justice and conviction would be powerful enough for her to step out of the shadows. And today, standing in this boardroom, Clara knew. That day had finally come. And the day Clara realized she'd held Sterling Corp's destiny in her hands for 30 years was also the day she felt more acutely than ever the cost of being invisible. On paper, she was the company's largest shareholder. But in everyday practice, she was nothing more than a silent shadow drifting through the vast, glass-lined hallways where every spotlight and every prime spot had long been reserved for white men bearing the Sterling name, or at least a distinguished pedigree. Each morning, when she arrived at headquarters, no one ever once addressed her with respect. Sometimes, as she passed through the revolving doors, a security guard would stop her, frown at her guest pass, and barrage her with questions he'd never ask a white shareholder or a young, well-dressed female assistant. "Excuse me, who are you here to see? Do you have an appointment? This is an executive-only area." Their suspicion was habitual rather than malicious, but enough to pile up into unseen wounds no outsider would ever notice. On the upper floors, when Clara stepped past the gleaming reception desk, she would meet looks of pity and thinly veiled annoyance from the attendant. "You can wait out there," the receptionist would say. "I'll let someone know you're here." If Clara dared ask for directions to the boardroom, she'd be sent on a wild goose chase, sometimes with a polite excuse. "You might want to check with HR or administration downstairs. They handle all employee matters." And in the elevators, where power was measured by the cut of a suit or the weight of a business card, mid-level managers would wrinkle their noses when they saw her press the executive-only floor. Some would even whisper to a colleague, "Why are people like her allowed up here?" If she inquired about a procedural detail or project status, she'd be met with stunned silence, a condescending shrug, or total disregard. as though she were nothing more than an uninvited guest. That invisibility was nothing new for Clara. From the moment she made her initial investment, despite her engineering degree, and despite being the only person who'd believed in Thomas Sterling when everyone else turned away, this system saw her only as that black woman with no credentials, a quiet bit player in a much larger machine. No one asked her opinion on strategic direction or sought her technological insight. They'd rather spend hundreds of thousands on foreign consultants than accept advice from someone like Clara. Her isolation deepened when Thomas died and full authority passed to Ryan Sterling, his only son, whom Clara had watched grow up in a luxury mansion, attend private schools, then Harvard, yet learn nothing of loyalty or fairness. Unlike his father, Ryan made no secret of his contempt for anyone beneath him. He turned the annual shareholder meeting into a personal stage, funneled money into flashy pet projects to burnish his image, and ruthlessly fired anyone who didn't bow to him, especially veteran employees loyal to Thomas. Clara observed all of it with profound sadness. She'd seen so many loyal colleagues pushed aside, so many bedrock values twisted into empty slogans. But what hurt her most wasn't being excluded from high-level decision-making, it was the cold invisibility. Despite her education, her legal standing, and her memories of Sterling Corp's humble beginnings, she was forbidden to truly exist in the place she'd helped build, simply because she was a woman, simply because she was black, simply because she didn't fit their narrow standard of power. And the more prejudice tried to bury her, the more Clara watched in silence, quietly cataloging every sign of rot, every crack in a system decaying from within. She knew her invisibility was the perfect cover, the preparation for the day when justice would finally come, the day all secrets would be exposed, and everyone who had ever believed themselves the center of the universe would be forced to face a harsh truth. But sometimes, invisibility becomes the keenest of all lenses. The more Clara was discounted, the more she overheard and witnessed things no one else anticipated, especially from those in power who believed every secret belonged solely to them, and that no outsider could ever see their moves. Thus, during Ryan Sterling's tenure, Clara quietly understood that Sterling Corp was on a one-way track to ruin. Ryan turned the company into his personal fortress. At first, the changes were small: maintenance contracts hastily awarded to his relatives, technology projects abruptly shelved with no explanation, training budgets reallocated to lavish entertainment and luxury purchases. Then the scale of his excess grew. Key employees slipped away in silence, departments cut back to the bone, and anyone loyal to the company's founding ethos gradually disappeared from the organizational chart. The ultimate degradation came on a sweltering early summer afternoon. Clara sat among the ordinary shareholders at the far end of the table, listening as Ryan swept his hand through the air and announced with icy resolve, "We need to cut deeper. Keep only those who truly add value. The leadership team, strategic units. The rest, I won't waste $1 on people who don't benefit the company." A ripple of excited murmurs passed among the junior managers. Room to climb, fewer old-timers blocking their path. Not a single thought for the hundreds of employees who'd poured their youth into Sterling Corp, now dismissed as disposable dead weight. Clara sat motionless, her hands trembling on the file in her lap from sheer outrage. Visions flashed through her mind. The defeated looks of long-serving staff handed their pink slips, a veteran manager's trembling plea, "Just a few more months, I'm about to retire." Single mothers suddenly stripped of their livelihood, young engineers who once believed in Thomas's creed of fairness and dedication. That night, Clara's small apartment felt suffocatingly dark. She sat alone at her desk, spreading out decades of shareholder agreements, old financial reports, and her own meticulous notes, mementos she'd collected over 30 years, preserving a forgotten legacy. Among the papers lay a yellowed, handwritten letter. Its ink faded, but its sincerity intact. Clara, this company belongs to both of us. If you ever see the values we built being distorted, if you sense a real danger to those who've devoted themselves to Sterling Corp., stand up. They need you now more than ever. Thomas. Clara held the letter, tears brimming. Not from weakness, but from clarity. The moment had arrived. All the humiliation, every dismissal, all those years of silent observation, they'd coalesced into an unshakable resolve. For the first time in 30 years, Clara no longer wanted to hide in the shadows, not to seek revenge and not to prove anything to that cold world of power. She was rising for everyone who once believed in a different Sterling Corp., a place where human dignity meant more than profit. That night, by the dim glow of a single lamp, Clara made her decision. At dawn, she would step into the light, confront Ryan and the entire board, not as an outsider, but as the one person capable of changing everything. And from that moment on, the wheel of Sterling Corp's destiny began to turn in an entirely unexpected direction. In that moment, when her resolve, forged overnight, shone brightest, Clara stepped into the shareholder meeting room with an entirely new bearing. No longer did she bow her head or skirt in through a side door. That day, she strode directly to the glass table at the room's center, the very place where power had pressed her down for so many years. The air was so stifling that even the smallest movement sent shareholders trading uneasy glances beneath their polished facades. Ryan Sterling, still the star of the show, sneered and tapped his fingers against the tabletop, as if to remind everyone who really held the reins. "Excuse me," he drawled. "This is an important company meeting. You should return to your proper place and stop interrupting the work of those actually responsible here." A pregnant pause settled over the room, broken only by a few mocking chuckles, soft but sharp enough to cut. A handful of board members nodded, cool indifference in their eyes. They were used to brushing Clara aside like an useless shadow. But this time, Clara did not flinch. Every movement she made was deliberate, steady, a calm in the midst of howling wolves. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a hefty stack of documents, the original share transfer agreement, her certified proof of ownership, notarized records bearing Thomas Sterling's signature, official scans authenticated by government agencies. She arranged them neatly on the table before the board. Laughter died on the vine. The room fell into a charged silence. Clara looked up and met Ryan's eyes. "I did not come here merely to fill a seat," she said. "I am the largest shareholder, legally empowered by Thomas Sterling, the company's founder, 35 years ago." For the first time, confusion flickered across the faces of the most powerful people in the room. Ryan's tapping hand froze. His mocking grin gave way to guarded uncertainty. Martha Donovan, the board's longest-serving member, fiddled nervously with her glasses as she scrutinized the red seals on the documents. Around the table, whispers rose, turning contempt into astonishment and suspicion. In that instant, the old order shattered. Clara, the woman they had underestimated, pushed to the margins, dismissed as an outsider, became the focal point. She alone held the authority to rewrite the rules in this room that had once been reserved for the privileged few. And as the room's atmosphere crackled with the weight of undeniable truth, the villain's mask slipped away. Ryan Sterling, now truly off balance, frantically searched for support, but even his closest allies began to waver. His arrogance contorted into denial, a last-ditch attempt to reclaim control. This is absurd. What right do you have to say any of this? I've never seen you involved in any major decision of this company." But every word Ryan spat only laid bare his panic, the fear of exposure from someone he'd always assumed powerless. Against Clara's steady gaze, his facade of control, his tactics of crowd manipulation, stood revealed as blatantly fragile. For the first time in decades, Sterling Corp's pillars of power recognized that the woman they'd forgotten had stepped onto center stage and held the very wheel of the company's fate in her hands. The room's silence was deafening, but beneath it, history was exploding. The old order had been challenged, and a new chapter had begun. In an instant, the once smug faces that had mocked Clara froze at the sight of the neatly arranged file spread before them. The heavy silence threatened to swallow the entire room. Then Ryan Sterling, accustomed to standing at the pinnacle of power, shattered the stillness with a vicious, insulting roar. "Is this some kind of joke? Who in their right mind would hand the company over to a black woman like you?" His tone betrayed more than momentary anger. It was pure panic, the sound of a man's world crumbling at the edges of his invincible facade. Behind him, several board members began to waver. They whispered among themselves in bewilderment, eyes flicking to Clara as if she were a ghost from the past. A mistake the old guard had tried desperately to bury. Martha Donovan, the board's longest-serving member and once a trusted confidant of Thomas Sterling, lifted each document with trembling hands, scanning every original ink stamp, notary seal, Thomas's signature, and SEC-verified scan. None of it could be forged. Her voice caught as she looked around the room. "They're all valid. That is Thomas's signature. This is the genuine transfer agreement." Her confirmation electrified the air. But Ryan, refusing to accept reality, bellowed in protest. "This is impossible. This is illegal intrusion. Security, call the lawyers. Now. I want her thrown out of here immediately." A security officer stepped forward, confused, until Martha spoke up. "Clara Carter is a lawful shareholder, and I attest that her ownership is legitimate. Any obstruction will be reported to the executive board and federal authorities." Undeterred, Ryan demanded the company's legal team. Lawyers were summoned at once. They pored over every detail, cross-checking each page, verifying share registration numbers with the SEC, tracing the transfer transactions. After more than an hour of tense scrutiny, the general counsel emerged, eyes wide with shock. Every document, the transfer deeds, the memorandum, the handwritten letter, the shareholder certificates, is authentic. Mrs. Carter's ownership is lawful. Clara remained composed. She didn't interrupt, she simply slid forward. Thomas Sterling's personal letter, the heartfelt plea to protect the company if I am no longer here. She then presented the original partnership memorandum, the investment records, and the SEC's confirmation, all the evidence that decades of prejudice had tried to obscure, now laid bare before those who once believed themselves the ultimate power. Confusion, fear, and helplessness spread across the seasoned leaders' faces as they faced a bitter truth. The old order was about to be overturned by the very forces they had denied: talent, loyalty, and an unassailable truth that no trick or regulation could distort. From this moment on, the legal battle had officially begun, and for the first time Sterling Corp's self-styled kings realized the game was no longer theirs to control. The legal counsel's confirmation seemed to choke the entire boardroom into silence. In that moment of shock, no one suspected that Clara Carter still had decisive cards to play. She made no move to bask in her legal victory. Instead, her calm expression and measured gestures only fueled Ryan Sterling's restlessness and deepened his associates' suspicion and fear. "So, what do you want? You really think you can accomplish anything with a few old documents?" Ryan sneered, grasping for whatever remnant of authority he could still claim. Clara quietly opened a fresh file and pulled out page after page of authenticated bank statements and internal reports, then projected them onto the meeting room's large screen. The images came into sharp focus. International wire transfers, millions of dollars diverted into offshore accounts under the guise of consulting fees, subcontracts, and equipment maintenance. In reality, sophisticated embezzlement. Payroll and pension fund reports, unexplained discrepancies, funds vanishing without. Justification, and a roster of employees removed from benefits after a single round of cuts. R&D project files, once Sterling Corp's lifeblood, relentlessly slashed with research. Budgets reallocated as special perks for Ryan's inner circle. Luxury travel, lavish parties, high-end cars, and off-the-books bonuses. With each revelation, Ryan's face grew paler. He initially tried to defend himself. "That's just routine financial adjustment. You know nothing about corporate management." But the more he spoke, the weaker his voice became. Each stamped approval, each signature line utterly irrefutable. The climax arrived when Jake, the young accountant who'd managed to retain his integrity amid the pack of wolves, suddenly stood up. His hands shook as he addressed the room. "I confirmed that every irregular transaction was ordered directly by CEO Ryan Sterling and his close management team. I was told in no uncertain terms to keep quiet, even threatened with dismissal if I revealed these dubious payouts. But I can no longer stand by and watch people lose their wages and retirement benefits to this fraud." All eyes turned to Jake, and a ripple of whispers swept through the room. Some long-serving executives began to avert their gazes. A few turned ashen. Others frantically rifled through their own files, fearing their names might appear in this damning evidence. For them, Clara, once literally invisible, had become a blockbuster revelation, shattering every illusion of untouchable power. In an instant, the mocking laughter, contempt, and deliberate dismissals of earlier days vanished altogether. What remained was panic, desperate bid for escape, and a genuine fear of the woman they'd so long regarded as an outsider. The struggle for control had reached a new crescendo, from legal maneuvering to a full public exposure, and the first knockout blow belonged to Clara. The air in the boardroom had grown almost viscous, charged with tension rising from every corner. With Clara's evidence laid bare, and Jake's courageous confirmation of it, any illusion of Ryan Sterling's untouchable domain was shattered. The board members, who had once shown icy indifference to the presence of a nameless black shareholder, now found themselves looking at Clara with a mixture of awe, confusion, and regret. In that moment, Martha Donovan, the woman who had witnessed Sterling Corp's rise and decline, and its longest-serving shareholder, rose to her feet. Her voice trembled with emotion, yet was firmer than ever. Only someone who truly cares for and truly loves this company would have the patience to wait 30 years to appear at the perfect moment and save its legacy from those bent on destroying it. I once believed that only a Sterling could safeguard this corporation, but today I realize I was wrong. Truth and conscience have returned in the form of a woman we all once overlooked. A ripple of murmurs ran through the room, then silence fell as that truth settled. Clara, calm as ever, looked each shareholder in the eye without a flicker of fear and spoke with authority. "I hereby move to suspend Ryan Sterling immediately from his role as CEO, and to place all executives implicated in the financial misconduct on administrative leave. The planned layoffs must be canceled at once. Additionally, I demand a full, transparent audit of the company's finances over the past 10 years. Her words cut through the board's last defenses like arrows, igniting an internal clash. Those who once turned away or sneered at Clara now exchanged desperate glances and frantically reviewed their own files. The vote that followed was the most high stakes in Sterling Corp's history. On one side was Ryan, who had wielded power, money, and connections to maintain his grip, now flanked by fearful, furious loyalists. On the other was Clara, representing faith, justice, and the pain of hundreds of exploited employees. Board members pored over original documents, SEC filings, and Jake's testimony, knowing that every ballot cast would mark a turning point. Either uphold wrongdoing or choose justice and renewal for Sterling Corp. At first tentative, then resolute, the votes swung in Clara's favor. The board's dismissive gazes transformed into unprecedented respect. Ryan Sterling, the man once drunk on absolute power, stood frozen, jaw clenched, eyes blazing with fury and bewilderment. His inner circle rose quietly, attempting calm facades but betraying their fear with trembling hands. They gathered their papers and slipped past Clara without daring to meet her gaze. The boardroom doors closed behind them, leaving the old guard in disgrace, as the remaining directors rose to applaud Clara, who, after 30 years of waiting, had irrevocably changed Sterling Corp's fate in a single day. A new era of transparency, fairness, and respect had dawned, and the Ryan Sterling regime had collapsed in the very hall of power he once ruled. But power never surrenders easily. The boardroom doors had barely closed behind the defeated when the real storm began to brew outside. Ryan Sterling, raised to believe his position was absolute and that every game must end in victory for people like him, found himself teetering on the brink of total loss. From that moment, the merciless nature of the old system clawed its way back to life in its death throes. Just hours after that fateful meeting, Ryan assembled a battalion of lawyers. They poured into headquarters, combing through every corner of the company's legal framework for the tiniest loophole to fight back. Simultaneously, Ryan unleashed a barrage of press releases and dirty media campaigns, painting Clara as an usurper, concocting tales of an illegal coup orchestrated by shadowy forces. On television and social media, Clara's image dominated sensational headlines like "Mysterious Female Shareholder Overthrows Legendary CEO. Who's really pulling the strings?" Malicious comments fixated on her race and gender. What does a black woman know about running a major corporation? Can you trust someone who sat silent as an anonymous shareholder for 30 years? Is Sterling Corp about to become a playground for an amateur? But that was only the beginning. Ryan reached out to major stakeholders, foreign investment funds and large shareholders, sending ominous emails warning of catastrophic collapse under unqualified leadership, making anonymous calls threatening lawsuits, even dangling the threat of a mass capital exodus unless the board re-examined Clara's ownership rights. Soon, the entire Sterling Corp fell into chaos. Rumors rippled through every department. Is Clara just a puppet for some hidden power? Will she slash headcount even more mercilessly? Is Ryan plotting a surprise counter-coup? Some neutral executives wavered, torn between factions, threatened with dismissal if they didn't switch sides, yet promised promotions if they remained loyal to Ryan. Regular employees fretted over paychecks, benefits, and their uncertain futures under Clara's fresh and utterly unpredictable leadership. Most intense of all was the onslaught on social media. Pervasive sexist and racist posts went viral, spiking hashtags like Yajaga Save Sterling, Haja Not My CO, and Bring Back Ryan, ratcheting the pressure on Clara to unbearable heights. Every move she made, every decision she announced was scrutinized, distorted, and cast through the hostile lens of the old guard unwilling to let go. There were nights when Clara's inbox and voicemail overflowed with anonymous threats. Don't even think of leading based on a few shares. We'll make you regret this if you continue. Sterling Corp doesn't belong to an outsider. Under that crushing tide of intimidation, many who'd grown used to Clara's invisible presence began to doubt. They couldn't believe someone once invisible could stand firm against such a ruthless power struggle. Yet, on the other side, Ryan, despite marshalling every resource, unleashing every low blow, could not hide the rotten core of the system he once ruled. Clinging to his seat, manipulating the media, bribing, threatening, and using every tactic to salvage the last shards of his prestige. And right at the heart of that storm, Clara understood. The greatest challenge now wasn't just legal, it was to reclaim people's trust, especially those blinded by the old power structure. The life-or-death battle between two generations of leadership had truly erupted, fought not only in courtrooms and boardrooms but in the hearts, minds, and beliefs of everyone at Sterling Corp. The pressure on Clara wasn't only coming from media attacks and personal smear campaigns. Just as the public relations front quieted for a moment, the fight with the old guard escalated into its most ruthless phase. Ryan and his accomplices launched direct assaults on Sterling Corp's operations, deliberately sowing chaos to justify his return. That morning, the accounting department discovered the company's bank accounts had been frozen. The payroll system ground to a halt. Panicked emails flooded in from department heads. I can't access the project fund. What about this pay cycle's salaries? Is the company going bankrupt? Meanwhile, Ryan tapped his old connections to bribe divisional heads and recruit influencers in key departments. Anyone loyal to me keeps their job and even gets promoted. Tempted by money and power, some began spreading dire rumors about the company's future. It didn't stop there. The IT department was blindsided by cyber attacks. Data systems were corrupted, network connections severed. The financial software, Sterling Corp's operational backbone, was infected with malware that threatened to erase or leak all sensitive records unless the board capitulated. In the hallways, the cafe, and small team meetings, whispers raced like wildfire. This company is going to collapse under a black woman's leadership. Only Ryan can save Sterling Corp. Even with his faults, he still commands clients' and investors' trust. The stock market reacted violently. Sterling Corp's share price plunged. Institutional investors questioned the stability of the new leadership. Contracts were put on hold, and suppliers demanded advance payments. Reporters, analysts, even longtime staffers who'd rallied behind Clara could not hide their unease. Amid the crisis, Clara showed her true mettle. Refusing to show weakness, she immediately convened her closest allies, Martha Donovan, Jake Wilson, and the finance, IT, and HR experts still committed to change. In a small conference room under stark white lights, they drew up a multi-pronged response. Clara decided to do what no Sterling Corp CEO had ever done. She spoke directly to every employee. She laid out every plan with full transparency, publicly disclosed the company's true financial status, updated everyone on the legal battle's progress, spelled out the risks, but also shared concrete solutions. An emergency all-hands meeting was convened. For the first time, Clara appeared as a genuine leader, wearing a minimalist suit, eyes steady, her voice both earnest and resolute. I know you're worried. Sterling Corp has never faced such a fierce storm, but I also know you're here because you believe in the real value of this company, in your own abilities, and in a future free from dirty power plays. My team and I are negotiating with the bank and setting up a temporary fund to ensure paychecks go out on time. We've enlisted cybersecurity experts to secure and restore all our data. I promise that no one will be left behind or underestimated, even in our toughest moments. Martha then presented an interim audit report, detailing the previous leadership's misconduct and highlighting the company's recovery potential if everyone united to weather this crisis. Jake, once silenced, now a symbol of integrity, confirmed the financial rescue plans and answered candid questions about cash flow and compensation. He pledged to personally oversee every expenditure to prevent any further losses or hidden transactions. Despite relentless media scrutiny and market pressure, the image of an ordinary black CEO had flipped the narrative through transparency, direct dialogue, and uncompromising honesty. Clara not only retained the trust of the majority of employees, but also inspired a new leadership model, one where trust and unity matter more than titles or pedigree. This battle wasn't just a power struggle. It was a fight to reclaim dignity, transparency, and trust, virtues the old regime had long since abandoned. Unwilling to bow to the collapse of his power, Ryan Sterling unleashed one final reckless act of vengeance. With every public avenue blocked by Clara's transparency and decisiveness, he and his inner circle resorted to darker, lawless tactics, betting everything on one last gamble: the complete destruction of Sterling Corp. One evening, when the IT team had thought their day was done, a series of unusual alerts flooded the system. Internal security warnings flagged strange logins and malicious code injections on the central servers. Every file, financial records, HR documents, research data, customer information, had been rigged with a kill switch, a command set to automatically wipe all data if anyone attempted unauthorized recovery or access. Ryan wasted no subtlety. He sent a direct ransom email to the executive team. Return control of Sterling Corp to me within 24 hours, or every piece of company data will be destroyed. Don't think about calling the police or the press. You'll lose everything. IT immediately convened an emergency meeting. Michael, the head of technology, together with Jake and the young engineering team, traced the malware's origin to an administrative account belonging to Logan, Ryan's closest assistant. After hours of forensic work, they compiled full access logs, code snippets, and incriminating internal emails. It was unmistakable. Logan and Ryan had conspired to extort and sabotage the company from within. Without hesitation, Clara ordered every piece of evidence turned over to the FBI's Cyber Crime Division. Agents were on site at Sterling Corp that very day, inspecting servers, seizing equipment, and summoning Logan for questioning. The proof was irrefutable. Login records, threatening emails, and malicious code designs all bore Logan's, and by extension Ryan's, fingerprints. Simultaneously, Ryan Sterling was taken into custody, charged with a litany of crimes: financial fraud, extortion, destruction of company systems, investment manipulation and embezzlement, and violations of national cybersecurity laws. Television news ran special reports. Former Sterling Corp. CEO arrested for conspiracy and financial crimes. FBI steps in as major tech firm faces historic scandal. Ex-leadership team faces decades behind bars. Every secret and stain of the old regime was laid bare in the blazing light of justice. Clara and her allies were no longer under suspicion. They became heroes for daring to stand up and protect the company against a ruthless, unethical cabal. Ryan's total downfall marked not merely the fall of one man, but the end of an era, one in which deceit, greed, and criminality had been presumed the only way to hold power. For the first time in decades, Sterling Corp was truly cleansed of the darkness that had long poisoned its halls. The FBI raid on Sterling Corp and the arrest of Ryan and his accomplices marked an irreversible turning point. As the last remnants of the old regime were swept away, a new chapter began, and at its center stood Clara Carter, the woman who had been invisible for 30 years. Within the first week after the crisis, the board convened an emergency session and unanimously voted Clara in as Sterling Corp's official CEO. No one questioned her credentials or capabilities anymore. Her swift, tangible revival of morale and productivity in every hallway and department spoke for itself. The overhaul began at once. On her first day in office, Clara walked onto the stage of the packed auditorium, calm yet resolute, her voice carrying clearly even without a microphone. Sterling Corp paid dearly for the arrogance and blindness of the old guard, but today we're not here to mourn the past. We're here to build a future where every person has opportunity, every voice is heard, and every individual is respected. She then unveiled a series of sweeping reform initiatives. Employee Equity Program. Every staff member, from entry level on up, will have the opportunity to own shares, something unimaginable under Ryan's leadership. Sterling Carter Scholarship Fund, an annual scholarship for underrepresented. Students, with special focus on young people of color and women in STEM fields. R&D revival. All previously neglected projects will return to the development pipeline, nurturing the young creative teams once overlooked. Enhanced benefits. A higher minimum salary, expanded healthcare coverage, and generous paid time off, designed to support employees and their families. Zero Tolerance Equity Pledge. Clara signed an immediate commitment to foster a workplace that is fair, transparent, and absolutely respectful of differences in gender, race, background, or role. A new kind of leadership. Clara didn't just speak these promises, she lived them. She often left her executive floor to visit engineering teams, the IT department, or administrative staff, sometimes dropping in unannounced for lunch, simply to talk, listen, and ask about their lives. The image of a CEO in plain attire, sitting with young engineers, sharing a meal with maintenance crew members, and asking after their families gradually replaced the old portraits of cool, aloof authority. At every team meeting, she began with the same question. What ideas do you want to try? What makes you proud of your work? Every suggestion, even the smallest, was documented and publicly addressed. Clara encouraged everyone to submit innovation proposals directly to her office, promising to read and personally respond to each one, changing the narrative. At first, the press and public remained skeptical. Headlines still asked, "Can Sterling Corp survive this storm?" And, "Is a black woman ready to lead a billion-dollar corporation?" But within months, the data spoke louder than doubt. Turnover plummeted, high-caliber applicants surged, and many veteran employees who had left sought to return. The once tense atmosphere transformed into one of enthusiasm and collaboration. Major publications were forced to acknowledge Clara Carter, a new symbol of fairness and female leadership. Sterling Corp, under Clara, where everyone owns their destiny. Through genuine transparency, unwavering integrity, and relentless opposition to injustice, Clara gradually led Sterling Corp out of the shadows into an era of unity, innovation, and sustainable growth. And all around the offices and corridors, people whispered, This isn't the old Sterling Corp anymore. This is our company. Just 1 year after the crisis erupted, Sterling Corp had been reborn with an entirely new identity. The memories of a seemingly irredeemable meltdown had become an inspiring case study on corporate governance and corporate turnaround forums across the U.S. Revenue growth returned, and confidence was fully restored. The first quarterly financial reports under Clara's leadership astonished not only investors but industry experts. Double-digit revenue growth, its strongest in 5 years. The stock, once in freefall, began to stabilize. International partners and clients started signing long-term deals again. Major investment funds, once wary of scandal, now proudly aligned themselves with the transparent, humane Sterling Corp. People development programs ignited a fresh burst of energy. Clara's reform initiatives delivered results beyond expectations. Scholarship and skills. Training program. No longer just a slogan, this program reached every level of staff. Anyone, from custodians, technicians, and administrative assistants to managers, could apply to upskill, change career paths, or try a new role if they had the determination. Industry leading. Wages and benefits. For the first time in the company's history, Sterling Corp's minimum wages exceeded the industry standard. Health insurance, family support programs, paid leave, and wellness benefits were expanded equitably for all employees, regardless of position or tenure. The invisible became empowered. Thanks to these changes, employees once overlooked, like Rebecca, a young administrative assistant, finally stepped into the spotlight. Previously, Rebecca's day had consisted of photocopying documents at her desk, dismissed by colleagues and never asked about her aspirations. But when Sterling Corp rolled out its learning support initiative, she boldly enrolled in a programming course. Funded in full, she was paired with veteran IT engineers in the company's mentorship network. After just 12 months of hard work, the ordinary admin clerk had become an IT engineer, contributing directly to data security projects, roles once reserved for the corporate elite. Without Clara and this program, I'd probably still be stuck at the front desk, Rebecca said, her voice choked with emotion at an all-hands meeting. Anniversary of the historic turning point. Clara's keynote became a symbol. On the first anniversary of that watershed day, employees and partners of all sizes gathered in the new headquarters, a light-filled open space that banished the cold glass walls of old. A grand stage stood in the atrium, a banner proclaiming, "We are all leaders of our own lives." Clara, in her simple yet elegant suit, stepped up to the podium. Her gaze swept over the hundreds of faces before her. No longer skeptical eyes from day one, but proud, united expressions. 1 year ago, I stood before you, anxious, afraid, but carrying one unwavering belief. No one has the right to judge another person based on gender, skin color, or background. You have proven that to the world with your courage and perseverance. If you have the will and the drive, you can change not just your own life, but the world beyond these walls. Thunderous applause rolled across the room and didn't let up. In that moment, all old wounds dissolved, leaving only the light of justice. A light once buried by bias and the old guard, now shining upon a Sterling Corp that truly belonged to everyone. Clara's legacy was more than profit figures. It was belief, opportunity, equality, and the power of every individual in the Sterling Corp family. Just 1 year after the storm hit, Sterling Corp has emerged reborn with a completely new identity, one that goes beyond business recovery to redefine values, justice, and compassion in a world long confined by biases of race, gender, and background. The end of the old regime, Ryan Sterling and His Just Desserts. The Sterling Corp case quickly became a blockbuster story in U.S. finance. Ryan Sterling, once the poster child for dynastic power, was sentenced to a long prison term for financial fraud, corporate sabotage, cyber threats, extortion, and obstruction of justice. His closest accomplices, Logan Matthews, Walter Price, and other executives who abetted him, were either prosecuted or forced to pay millions in restitution for the damage they'd caused. After the final verdict, public discourse fell silent. Wealth, power, and pedigree are no impenetrable armor. Only truth, transparency, and integrity endure. An ordinary woman as an everlasting symbol of fairness. In the aftermath of the trial, Clara Carter declined any personal fanfare or private celebrations. Instead, she proposed displaying her simple handbag, the one she'd carried unnoticed for 30 years, inside a glass case in the main lobby beside Sterling Corp's new logo. Etched on a band of white marble in gold letters read, "Founded by Thomas Sterling and Clara Carter, 1988. That well-worn bag became an icon for everyone at Sterling Corp, a reminder that any person deemed ordinary can make an extraordinary difference. The largest celebration in company history. The whole building buzzed with festivity as Sterling Corp held a grand appreciation ceremony for employees, families, and partners, especially honoring those who'd once been rendered invisible. Alongside the board, Clara awarded scholarships to dozens of minority students, bright young talents who the old regime might have discarded, hundreds of employees across every role, security guards, technicians, administrators, custodians, accountants, officially received company shares. No barriers remained. No one was on the outside anymore. On the ceremony stage, under brilliant lights, Clara stood, calm, modest, yet radiant as a true leader. She gazed at the display case, then turned to the crowd, her eyes full of conviction. "I was once just an ordinary woman, considered unworthy of a voice or any authority, but I have seen countless silent lives, and I have learned this. Every ordinary person possesses extraordinary potential. Listen to, respect, and believe in those who might seem small, for it is their dedication, perseverance, and courage that hold the key to real change. Today, we honor not only achievements but also human dignity, compassion, and true fairness." From one simple handbag to a new era, Clara's legacy is more than profits or stock value. It is an endless source of inspiration for generations to come, reminding us all that everyone deserves opportunity, respect, and the chance to create something amazing from the smallest beginnings. Sterling Corp has entered an era of equity, humanity, and innovation, where the light of justice is no longer distant, but the guiding star of every action and dream. What do you think? What do you make of Clara Carter's journey? A woman once invisible, who dared to stand at the very heart of a power struggle, transformed into an icon, reshaped an entire corporation's destiny, and inspired thousands? In your own community or workplace, how many Claras might still be waiting silently for their voices to be heard and their talents recognized? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever met someone like Clara, or have you yourself been underestimated yet refused to give up? If this story moved you, please hit a like, share with your friends, and subscribe to follow more extraordinary journeys from the most unassuming heroes. Thank you for being with us.